are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and I'm on this October 23rd day, 2017, and I'm joined at the roundtable by Chelsey Youman. If you were with us during the first half hour, we had Bryan Newman on from Young Leaders for Life, which is part of Council for Life, and he was talking to us about kind of the pro-life movement, specifically here in Dallas, but also that's just the ripple effects of what's happening here is kind of moving out there. And they're hosting one of their fundraiser events, their signature fundraising event this Wednesday for lunch. And so if you're in the Dallas area or would like to travel to Dallas to attend that lunch, you can go to councilforlife.org. Being there 2 years ago, I can tell you it's always a great program, and it always kind of moves and compels me to want to do everything that I can to really fulfill what the writer of Proverbs, specifically Proverbs 31, 8, and 9 say, to be a voice for the voiceless. And so we're going to transition from that to then Chelsey just talking about some other tragic news that continues to ripple forward. If you've been following along with the media, kind of the narrative that's been moving forward, we're continuing to see the sexual harassment and kind of some of this degradation of women that's been put forward by these individuals. For the past 2 or 3 weeks, I guess we can say that Harvey Weinstein has been in the news just relative to some the women that are coming out saying they've been sexually harassed, they've been sexually abused by Weinstein, and just kind of some of the acts that have been done to him. But then over the weekend, we continued to hear more individuals that are coming forward that are fulfilling kind of the model that was put forward by Weinstein. You have 38 women spoke to the New York Times earlier this week, over the weekend rather, and there's a director named James Tobach speaking to the LA Times rather, James Tobach, that was very much in the Weinstein model. He's 72, a big bulking guy. You've probably known him from such movies as The Pickup Artist. He was also in The Private Life of Modern Women. He's just one of those individuals that had a level of influence. And in order for individuals to be able to make their way into his good graces and favor, he really denigrated women. And Chelsey, again, this is just a very sad reminder that we live in a fallen world and that there are very sick and fallen people in this world.
That's so right. I mean, we're starting to see that this is systemic, and I know that we're just looking at maybe the top most famous examples that we can, and we're, cherry picking those individuals out. But to think that really the statistics speak for themselves, that 1 in 5 women is sexually assaulted in her life is staggering. And if you even just sit in church and start counting 1 out of every 5 that are sitting around you, it really becomes a visual for what 20% of the women in our country have dealt with. And that's just to rise to the level of sexual assault or abuse. 1 in 6 have been that, including that statistic, there's been an attempt at a sexual assault. And so that there's 1 in 20 men that this faces. It's not just women alone, but we have a problem as a society. And I think that sometimes we try to marginalize, we have to define what we're saying, because I've heard so many people on the right actually say, well, really, what is sexual harassment, or what is it? Is this just an isolated incident or isolated individuals? And I think what we're starting to see is these examples are coming out, but there are hundreds of victims in these men's lifetimes.
And I think that's the thing that I think you hit on a great point, and that it's the thing that I'm having to watch myself from using language that my grandmother would not approve of right now, because I'm disgusted by it. I'm just absolutely disgusted by it, because it's not a left or right issue.
No.
It's everybody. Mm-hmm. You've got on one side, you got Harvey Weinstein. That again, he's done a lot of different things, but he's largely been a supporter of the left. But then on the right side, you've got Bill O'Reilly and some of the things that have been put forward by him. And one of the disgusting things that continues to happen that broke over the Times over the weekend is that Bill O'Reilly literally paid $38 million to kind of the appease, I guess you would say. According to the New York Times, last January, 6 months after Fox News ousted its chairman amid sexual harassment scandal, Bill O'Reilly signed a $32 million agreement with a longtime network analyst to settle new sexual harassment allegations. And then that happened in January. But then on February, they re-signed him. Fox News re-signed this known individual that's perpetuating this sick behavior They re-signed him to another 4-year contract worth $25 million. This isn't a left issue. This isn't a right issue. This is a wrong issue that's affecting both sides.
Right. He needs to go. He needs to go. And what frustrates me is, okay, we're thinking when you do the math, I read the Department of Justice said about every 98 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Every 98 seconds. That's staggering. And then you have these corporations that are providing cover for people who are perpetuators of that. I mean, these are people who belong in the criminal justice system.
It's just disgusting that's happening right now. And again, I think about it from the 98 seconds rule that you said that, and then you said the 1 in 5. And that's just women that are speaking up on this issue. There's a Stockholm syndrome. There's some type of thing that's happening where women don't feel like they've created a culture whereby they can even speak up.
Well, and there is a culture that says, well, were you at the party, or how much had you been? There's a little bit of a shame culture that we have to acknowledge that goes alongside this, and also the fact that our church offers a lot of counseling for women who are victims of assault, and men too, but and they find there's a lot of guilt and shame associated with that event. Could I have done something to prevent it? Should I have spoken up more? And then the other question I've seen that comes up a lot is who do you tell? Because sometimes it's not always criminal. And so in the case of Harvey Weinstein, is that sexual harassment if he doesn't actually physically touch the women? There's not really an assault there to report to the criminal justice system. And so figuring out some of these mechanisms to create a safer environment for people to come forward. And those are just, I think, the more extreme examples. I think almost every woman I know has had an instance in her life where someone in the hallway, I read there was a story about someone in the hallway in grade school walking by and just grabbing women. And that's common. I mean, that's something almost every woman I know has encountered at least some form of, I would call that sexual harassment in their life. And so really, it's interesting. The statistics are down from 1993 on this issue. So hopefully drawing more light and people coming forward and being brave with their stories. And I think naming the perpetrators. I think there needs to be more of a culture of shame around these issues.
And that's one of the things that I'm so encouraged by, because I think you bring up a really great point, because there's been many people, again, on the right and the left, that have really lamented or criticized this whole hashtag Me Too kind of phenomenon that's happened right now. But again, there's, like you said, there's certain things that individuals do that aren't necessarily, there's not a lever or there's not a mechanism whereby they can punish or where they can point out the wrong perpetuated by this individual. And so there has to be that level of shame and guilt in the court of public opinion that really does identify this is an individual that's sick. This is not the way people are supposed to be treated. This is contra to the golden rule. This is contra to who we are as humans. But we can't continue to allow this to happen. So something needs to be done.
Right. And I've also heard the statement, if everything is sexual harassment, then nothing's sexual harassment. And so to those people, or people who say Me Too is ineffective, which maybe it's not, but it's starting to draw light and attention to really how systemic this is. But at that point, we need a cultural change. We need a heart change as Americans. The porn culture that's out of control, and frankly, sexual freedom and sexual liberty in that movement, I think, has given a lot of rise to these issues. We know that sex trafficking and sex slavery has more slaves currently today are in sex trade than there ever were in the African slave trade, ever in history.
Disgusting.
So if you start to look at these numbers, you think, okay, there are very real issues underlying our society right now that they need to be addressed and rampantly, rampant. I don't know where it begins, but
I wrote an article. I was reading an article, wrote an article kind of forward for this for My Faith Votes. They put out this little email blurb every Wednesday that kind of highlights particular issues. And one of the things that My Faith Votes highlights is the idea of family and caring for those in need. And I used kind of this as a platform whereby to get to that particular point. And right as soon as I was writing the article, a little picture came up. My mom sent me a picture of my niece Eva, which is just this 3-year-old perfection that kind of makes me question whether the fall ever happened, because she's just perfect. and to think about that, what was happening with Harvey Weinstein and Bill O'Reilly, and then this celebrity chef, John Besh out of Louisiana, or what's even the Wall Street Journal talked about what's happening at Fidelity, and that was highlighted even this morning. I mean, this is so pervasive in our culture today that it just sickens me to know that my little niece, Eva, is going to be entering into this place. and it really did do something to me. Now, because obviously I don't usually get this animated about this thing,
I know.
and I'm getting very frustrated.
But we should. I mean, we should. Not only is it injustice, there are victims there who, for the rest of their lives, are going to need to cope with this. They need counseling. I have a lot to say about it, so we can keep going.
And we're going to continue to talk about this. And so if you are interested in calling in, we would love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. If you have your opinion that you'd like to highlight on this, we'll be talking about that once we get back from the break. But we're going to continue to talk about Harvey Weinstein. We're going to continue to talk about Bill O'Reilly, where maybe it's John Besh and what's happening in Louisiana, to everything, just how pervasive this problem is. But I think there's a point that we need to identify the problem that we face, which is the sexual harassment culture, and maybe some of the extenuating circumstances that bring us to that problem. But we also need to figure out what are some solutions, what are some opportunities whereby these women can be able to have their voices heard, and these men can be put into the place and shown the right way, and justice can flow down like a mighty river. And we're going to be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Father Joseph LaFleur served the Army Air Corps as chaplain during World War II. In 1941, LaFleur dashed about Clark Field in the Philippines amidst bombs and flying shrapnel, pulling wounded soldiers to safety. For such bravery, the Army Air Corps awarded Chaplain LaFleur the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Distinguished Service Cross. Later, while imprisoned by the Japanese for 3 years, he never stopped his ministry of care. He worked to meet the physical needs of his fellow prisoners, often bartering with guards for food. Once he confronted a fellow prisoner about stealing rations from other prisoners, even landing 2 holy punches to pacify the unruly and unrepentant soldier. In 1944, a U.S. submarine torpedoed LaFleur's prisoner transport ship. Rather than abandon ship or seek to escape Japanese gunfire and grenades lobbed in his direction, the chaplain worked to calm his men and to help them find an escape passage. Chaplain LaFleur died as he lived, in faithful service to his fellow man. Motivated by faith to care for their fellow man, chaplains in our nation's service routinely steady our servicemen and women before, during, and after battle. Military chaplains navigate the evils of war to bring good to our military. We honor Chaplain LaFleur and all chaplains for their dedication to the souls of our armed forces. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the roundtable today by Chelsey Youman. And before the break, we were kind of illuminating, talking about some of the allegations that have continued to unfortunately be put forward, unfortunately, and we're starting to see a theme in the news relative to this pervasive and also perverse kind of line of thinking that James Tobach, who is the director, is kind of a producer, LA Times kind of compilated 30 women that have come forward and kind of put the idea that he is an individual that has sexually harassed them at some point. And so these are 30 women that were either former or current employees. This continues in the saga that we're saying that it's not a right issue, it's not a left issue. So we're reminded that almost 3 weeks ago, Harvey Weinstein the allegations continued to come forward with Harvey Weinstein. It's traditionally been a man that's associated with the left and has very much supported Democratic candidates. And then we're also seeing it with Bill O'Reilly as well. The Times, New York Times rather, breaking over the weekend, this where he signed a $32 million kind of putting the allegations behind him. But then the next month that Fox News would put and sign him to a 4-year contract extension that paid him upwards of $25 million. Chelsey, what was kind of sickening for me is, like, again, I know we're in a system whereby you're innocent until proven guilty. But the fact that he was willing to sign this one kind of to a certain extent shows the guilt of his own conscience.
That is steep for a settlement. That is a very steep settlement. So I don't know what happened. I don't know how many people were involved in the issue. In the issue, I mean, he might have been a perpetrator against a dozen women for that cost. But that's not your run-of-the-mill criminal settlement. So they're definitely providing cover for him to continue not only to be on air, but to provide cover for him to continue these types of abuses.
And so there was he signed that $32 million whatever silencing agreement, we'll say, and then the next month that Fox would do this, would sign him to this contract extension of that level, $25 million a year. And then I think about, so of course, Bill O'Reilly has a response back to that saying they're trying to smear him, trying to extend these allegations in order that he might not be re-signed to another network, trying to sully his name. But then, so there was never complaints against him, which was a part of the statement that he released. So even just this morning, I was checking Twitter during the break, and this morning that Megyn Kelly, who's now of NBC, but also was at Fox News at the time, says that he is lying, that there was complaints because I was one of those individuals that complained. Chelsey, it's sickening. It's just sickening to me. And and again, I'm seeing it from an outside, and so I don't fully understand the situation, but I do know what I'm reading. And so you were saying that this seems to be pretty prevalent in the American culture today, especially from the woman's experience.
Yeah, I think it's more prevalent than anyone even knows, because the statistics I cited earlier, and just if you're new listening to us in the last few minutes, the statistics are that 1 in every 5 women is sexually assaulted, and 1 in every 20 men, out of every 20 men, are sexually assaulted. So every 98 seconds, an American is assaulted. But that doesn't even include sexual harassment, which goes beyond that. Some of these cases aren't necessarily criminal. Some of the things Weinstein did, unfortunately, they're not necessarily criminal, but they're still disgusting. There's still a high level of sexual harassment with a lot of victims. And one of the other things we're starting to see come out is just how much individuals and corporations are willing to cover the transgressions of others for some money in their pocket or for some reputation, or they're trading professionally on women. I
think one of the things that is just so illuminating to me, again, because there's the Christian, like just my Christian lens that I'm viewing this through right now, it just is wrong. It's just plain wrong. Like, I think about the biblical narrative, and I'm supposed to treat older women as younger sisters, like from 1 Timothy 5:2. It's the golden rule from Luke 6:31 of treat others the way you expect to be treated. It's this sense that we are the apple of God's eye, that we are accountable for him for all our actions and inactions. And I'm trying to think out what can be done, because I know you brought up a really great point that there are certain things that individuals do that are not punishable by law, but they're just wrong. And I need to figure out what are some of those things that we can be doing that are just wrong. And so I thought about, that's why I'm like, again, I don't think that the Me Too hashtag is the greatest thing, but I think it's the thing that needs to happen right now, right? To be able to illuminate this crap.
Right. So some critics have said, is it really that effective? If everything is sexual harassment, then nothing's sexual harassment. There are some critics out there, and I've even heard some funny statements on just certain articles saying, well, what can men do if everything they do is going to be sexual harassment? And I said, okay, well, don't touch anyone, and don't don't talk to them in a derogatory way. I mean, just be a good human to others.
Yeah.
Women don't belong to you. You don't own them. You don't possess them. So don't treat them like one. I don't think it's that difficult to know where those lines are. Don't be an animal, essentially. But also the other side of this would be we have to talk about the underlying causes. It's one thing to say, I think, International Justice Mission is a really great organization, so I'm going to tout them for a minute. But they really do active work internationally to relieve societies from slave trafficking and trade and other types of human rights issues internationally. And they say that the part of their model is based on understanding what the underlying causes are in these societies. So they don't just go in and break up the prostitute rings. What they do is they figure out in the city, what's going on to cause that. Why are crimes being allowed to be run rampant? Is the justice system broken or corrupt? And they start to fix the underlying causes. And eventually, after about 7 years, those crimes dissipate. And so we need to ask ourselves as a society, why is our society so degrading to women? I think Ben Shapiro had some really, really good analysis and commentary on this to talk about the sexual revolution and how women and feminists kind of want it both way. We can have, free sexual ethics. Sex means nothing, and there's no real emotional tie to that. Well, then men go from being protectors to people who take advantage of women, and kind of we're seeing what the demise of that type of mentality has caused in our society.
That's so frustrating, but also so illuminating. So it's this sense that we need to understand the kind of what's wrong is wrong and what we can begin to do, but then also understand some of these extenuating factors. My first blush is that we just all need to go to church. We just all
really though.
We just need
sincerely,
to be,
yes.
Yeah, we need to be a part of some of these institutions that really do perpetuate this virtuous ethics inside of us, in order that we might not treat each other like animals, right?
Right. I mean, human depravity comes from separation from God. I mean, that's the result of a de-Christianized society, and I think Christianity gets such a bad rap now publicly, but if you really think about it, my pastor had such a great sermon yesterday on just understanding all that Christianity is that we have a loving Father who sacrificed for us in order that we may spend eternity with him. And if people could really become more like Christ and become Christians and give their life over to him, this depravity, he changes it in us, and he replaces it with good. And we're seeing a society that has allowed politics to replace religion, has allowed too much sexual freedom and dehumanizing of women and men alike in our society, and the result is catastrophic.
I always think about, so when you think about Jesus, I think about him when he's like up there on the cross, and then his mother is trying to come to him, right? And when his mother comes to him in some of those last moments, what we see is he tells Peter to take care of it. Like even at the very end of his life, you see that he's still trying to take care of those women that are around him and that are surrounded by him. Like that's one of the lasting vestiges that I hope would be said about me, that I want to care for the people that are around me, but specifically not because I'm as you can't tell, viewers, I am huge. But like I'm caring for those people. I'm wanting to watch out for those people that are around me, whether they're women or men. But understand that we have a special responsibility towards individuals. That's how you love God. Is the manifestation of loving God is loving your brother. It's loving your sister, and we need to continue to move towards that end. And we would love to hear your opinion on this as well. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We'll continue talking about this after we get back from the break, as well as we'll kind of explore some of the other topics that are making news today, everything from Iran and Iraq to the schism that's happening in the Republican establishment. Right after this.
From director Kevin Sorbo and executive producer Sean Hannity comes Let There Be Light. Saul Harkins is a man who has turned away from God, but a near-fatal car crash gives him one last chance to renew his life, his family, and his faith. Let There Be Light, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters October 27. More information is available at LetThereBeLightMovie.com.
Christianity is based in history, on evidence, and all truth revealed in God's Word is for our good, not just spiritually, but in every way. Point of View's mission is to restore God's truth in our culture, and to do it effectively, we need you as a partner. Your gift helps inspire people, young and old, from coast to coast to rebuild truth in their communities. Join the Truth Team today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Get off the sidelines. Pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this October 23rd, 2017 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I am hosting Point of View today, this morning edition here in the Dallas area. And I'm joined at the roundtable by Chelsey Youman of First Liberty Institute. How are you, Chelsey?
Good on this Monday morning.
It's been such a good morning so far.
It has. We've gotten fired up already, and it's not even barely 10 o'clock.
I know, exactly. We had a great first hour. We chatted with Bryan Newman of Young Leaders for Life, which is a kind of a part of Council for Life. And so Young Leaders for Life is just doing some phenomenal work, but he was here highlighting what's going to be, what I'm positive will be a phenomenal luncheon on Wednesday beginning at 11 o'clock. And you can sign up and go to that luncheon at 11 o'clock on Wednesday if you go to councilforlife.org. So councilforlife.org, there's still spots left to be able to sign up and to attend that luncheon. What if the past is any indication, will be a phenomenal program that really does try to illuminate kind of the pro-life movement that's happening here in Dallas that has ripple effects across the country, as well as you finding your spot in that particular place. There's always room at the table for individuals. And so, again, you can sign up for that at councilforlife.org. And we talked about the pro-life movement, and Bryan was just such a great personality to kind of help illuminate some of the good things that are happening, not just being against abortion, but really being for life and creating an atmosphere for life. And then we transitioned into just talking about just the sick, and I kind of got a little bit more animated than normal, Chelsey. Just talked about the sick nature of what's happening on both the right and the left when it comes to this sexual abuse and sexual allegations that continue to be perpetuated into our culture. Everyone from Harvey Weinstein and just everything that continues to come out with him, then to James Tobog, and then to Bill O'Reilly, and then to John Tesh. I mean, we're just seeing more and more individuals that have been a part of this atmosphere whereby women are degraded, and it's just sickening. And I'm sure the face of God is sad when he sees this stuff. And so we also opened up the phone lines to be able to allow you to call in towards some of these issues about potential solutions that can be illuminated as well as identified with that. And we're going to continue taking your phone calls. So if you want to call in, that number is 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to transition. So if you go to pointofview.net, our website, you'll be able to find links on the webpage to our next kind of topic. And it's kind of the schism that's happening in the Republican Party. In a crazy twist, people are fighting in politics, Chelsey.
What's new?
I'm shocked by this. I'm just absolutely shocked by this. And so Pete Weiner was of the Bush 43 White House, has served in the past 3 Republican White Houses, is also the Ethics and Public Policy Center, came out with an op-ed on Sunday in the Sunday edition of the New York Times, and really talked about, almost to a certain extent, and tell me if I'm making a fair characterization here, Chelsey, of just the schism that's happened relative to the establishment and the anti-establishment within the Republican Party, and kind of the individuals that he continues to identify. Obviously, the anti-establishment, which you have Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, and then the kind of the establishment, I guess you could say, were the Mitch McConnells, were the Paul Ryans of the party, and how he says that Pete Weiner was very much of the establishment movement, and really did say that we can't allow these ethno-nationalistic individuals continue to try to hijack the Republican Party moving forward.
There's a lot to unpack here, but I truly think this isn't new. I think this is something that started even back in at least 2007 to 2008 campaigning during the Obama election. I was in college at Texas A&M. I'm an Aggie, whoop, and the other Aggies out there. And I remember being on campus, and we're all campaigning and looking over, and there were the Republicans and the Tea Party activists. And it was really the rise of the Tea Party. And at the time, everyone said, is this going to be part of the demise of the Republican Party, in the sense that it was the first time we really had a separation internally in a while. And I think that this is just an exaggerated effect and a more clear and precise division within the party that we're seeing. It's the Tea Party gone to one extent. It's the same party that had 17 primary candidates last year. If we didn't have a fragmented party last year, I don't know what it was, because there were 17 candidates. And I think that in this article, if our listeners want to go and look it up online, he exaggerated the point a bit about Trump being, I think, the head of this new movement, because if you remember some of the statistics in the polling early on in the primary, when we had 17 candidates, Trump never took more than about 30% of the vote for polling. I mean, he never had more than 30%, but there were so many other candidates. It's important to remember that the Republican Party was dividing their votes among all of those individuals, and he just ended up having, I think at one point it was mostly 26% of the popular vote in the Republican Party, and that was barely enough to start edging out these other guys. And so I wouldn't say that he's representative of the party as a whole. I think that's a long shot, but I would say that he is what people are referring to as a postmodern president. He's post-ideological. He's certainly not a fundamental conservative, not on social issues. I don't know if he cares at all about social issues.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your take on is on it. That's a little bit of mine.
I think it's interesting. I think you do highlight some really good instances that the party, to a large degree, any party to a large degree, has always been fragmented. It's just that there hasn't been this loud a voice, and the voice hasn't been given this loud. I think it's a really interesting point and a great statistic that you brought up, that he only got around 30 to 35% of the party kind of vote. And then you wonder in the general election, polling was pretty clear that individuals weren't necessarily voting for him, but voting against her.
Absolutely.
And then what we always knew to be true is the third-party candidates that rose up. These third-party candidates, really individuals that said that they were supporting the third-party candidate, at the end of the day, never really voted for the third-party candidate. Because if you were wavering or unsure and not fully committed, I should say, to the third-party candidate, traditionally what statistics have shown us is you go back to your home party. And so what we saw, especially in this past election, is just this sense that, yes, there were a multitude of manifestations within the Republican Party relative to ideology, but what we're continuing to see relative to President Trump as well as Steve Bannon and kind of their push towards the anti-establishments, the Mitch McConnells, is there is just this increasing division that's happening. And I guess for practical purposes, Chelsey, I wonder, are we ever going to get to see anything done? We haven't seen
I sure hope so.
We haven't seen healthcare put forward. We've seen what we saw, except on the right side, what we saw for the past 8 years on the left side is just a ton of executive orders that have been offered up. And now it's just a ton of executive orders that are undoing the other executive orders that were moved forward. Right. And while this is something good, it's not necessarily something helpful and beneficial.
The battle of the EOs continues. It continues. Look, and that's part of, I do think, what he tapped into was just this sense of dissatisfaction in the party of, we need to get stuff done. We're tired of having to cross the aisle. We've lost for 8 years. We lost under Obama. And I think that the country really was looking for not just a strong leader, but someone who was going to be bold and brave. And if anything, Trump is that. I mean, he's a bold guy, and he's going to say what he thinks, and he's going to be blunt about it, and he's not going to talk to a PR person, obviously, about it first. So, but I think that's refreshing to an American public who's been told, sit down, shut up, be politically correct in all of your statements. And internationally, if we look at the play that had in our diplomatic relations, I mean, I think they were at an all-time low. Respect for America in diplomatic relations was at an all-time low under Obama.
Yeah, and so we're going to continue to talk about this. So if you'd like your point of view or you'd like to share a comment or question, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. And when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about this divisiveness, and is there ever an opportunity for us to actually get something done? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Meredith Dake O'Connor wrote about 6 reasons your right-wing friend isn't coming to your side on gun control. I hope others will use this sort of format to express why people aren't convinced by many of the arguments put forward by progressives. Writing this may have been good therapy for Meredith to write, but it also served to explain to gun control proponents why so many do not accept their rhetoric. The strident activists won't be convinced, but perhaps others will see why many of the charges and criticisms don't have any impact on Americans who support the Second Amendment. One of her reasons is the fact that we rarely get to come to the conversation in good faith. Name-calling isn't exactly the best strategy to get someone to come to your point of view. I would love to ask some of the pundits and commentators if their goal is to convince someone or merely shame them and attack their character. Remember the Facebook comment by a CBS employee who was later fired? She wrote, "If they won't do anything when children were murdered in Newtown, I have no hope that repugs will ever do the right thing." Another one of her reasons is the simple fact that the loudest voices are often the most ignorant. Whether you're arguing for gun control or any other government policy, you aren't going to get very far if you get most of the details wrong. Also, talking about gun laws in other countries is irrelevant to her. Often the studies cited are inconclusive. But there's a more important reason. The United States has a Second Amendment, and these countries do not consider possession of a firearm a constitutional right. Most gun owners believe that owning a firearm is a right. They're not going to be convinced otherwise by critics who call them heartless and uncaring, and they aren't going to be persuaded by critics who don't seem to know what they're talking about. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Based on the incredible true story and best-selling book from Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me, rated PG-13, now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined today by Chelsey Youman, and we were talking about right before the break just the schism that's happening within the Republican Party right now. There's the anti-establishment and the establishment movement that's continued to be perpetuated. And Chelsey, it's just increasingly frustrating because what we're continuing to see is that there is this kind of fractious nature that's happening, but nothing's really getting done outside of executive orders. But we also saw over the weekend, I don't know if you got a chance to see this, on your old alma mater, the unity that came about. I don't know if you saw that. Just all 5 living former presidents were together over the weekend to be able to throw a concert. I think it's One American Appeal was the group that put it on, to put on a concert event that really tried to help some relief efforts in Houston to Louisiana to Puerto Rico. And it was a really beautiful movement. I don't know if you saw some of the video or not.
It seemed wonderful. I mean, the 5 of them, they get together and they often do these types of events. Not often, but they do these types of events. And it's pretty extraordinary that they used all of that capital really to raise reliefs and funds for people who have been damaged by the hurricanes.
I think I was just struck, Chelsey, by when I looked at it was just striking to see these 5 men that really are just from all different types of ideological stripes. That you've got everyone from Jimmy Carter, who was the individual in the White House that was saying, let's turn off the air conditioning in the middle of the summer in order to save money. That was to the extent that his environmental efforts, as well as just some of his physical conservatism, that was kind of making its way, even though he was a Democrat. Then to George H.W. Bush, to George W. Bush, to Bill Clinton, to Barack Obama. You just see these men of a variety of different stripes. But I was struck, though, when I was looking at a picture, and I just thought these are men that have faced their own difficulties. So you had everyone from Carter that faced Iran to H.W. Bush that faced Iraq, and Kuwait and the Desert Storm kind of movement. Then you had Bill Clinton, who had his Kosovo, President Bush, who had 9/11, to Barack Obama that continues to try to fight in Syria, as well as just some of the efforts relative to ISIS. Just these individuals that really had faced difficulty, but it's in the midst of that difficulty that they really did come together to see that their patriotism melted any sense of partisanship in that moment. And it was just so encouraging to be able to see.
They definitely, and they seem to genuinely like each other.
Yeah.
I happened to be at the Bush presidential library groundbreaking, and then the grand opening, and all 5 presidents came to that as well. And they had their arms around each other. They were very lax and congenial with each other. And I think that they always talk about Bill Clinton being the other Bush son.
Yeah.
I mean, they have genuine relationships, and I think it's really great and unifying for the country to see that. And I can't help but wonder how Trump is going to fit into the club.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the things that, again, he wasn't there. There was a lot of other things that I'm sure he was doing during that time. He did have a 2-minute video clip that they played during the time to be able to show his support as well as his gratitude for what the former presidents were doing. And it really does. It just seems like we've entered into a new age of disunity and fractiousness now, where we can't even really talk to one another anymore because it's no longer suitable just to disagree with one another, but we have to demonize each other.
Right. I think I saw a statistic this weekend that 93% of media coverage of Donald Trump is negative.
Wow.
93%. They are finding a way to demonize him and dehumanize him. And Jimmy Carter even recognized as much in an interview he did recently, where he said, more than ever, the president, this is my paraphrase of it, but more than ever, this president, they treat him more disrespectfully than they ever have traditionally with a U.S. president. And maybe it's partly because he has been such a personality. But that has to wear on the American people.
It's to the point. It's just it's tiring to be able to try to keep up with everything, because to a certain extent, there are certain things that we need to celebrate that he does. There are certain things that we need to be aware that aren't necessarily, I would consider it worth celebrating, but not everything that he does has to be breaking news or reporting.
Well, no, but there's so many good things that even one of my neighbors recently was saying, I don't even know what he's done since he's been in office. And I was like, wow, you need to get on the listserv at the White House, because they blast out every Friday a list of things they did that week. And he's really making moves. And economically, I think the Dow hit 23,000.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, 23. Yeah.
23 for the first time in history. And if you look at since January when he was inaugurated until now, it has just been an immense increase. So economically, the country is doing better. I think he's definitely putting out a stronger foot. Putin quit making some moves that he was making under Obama. Yeah. I always think that Putin recognizes another strong leader. So George Bush had Putin personally out to Crawford Ranch. Yeah. One of the only foreign ministers that he was very, very personally close with. You noticed Russia wasn't making as many moves into the wrong territories when Bush was in office. So having a leader who I think puts out a strong foot, is opinionated, but definitely looks like he would be someone who would be difficult to reckon with at the bargaining table. That's important for America.
Yeah, but I think, is it possible that he just has a bad communications problem right now?
Possible or probable?
Because I think about just, again, the good things that he's done, and I like to think I keep pretty close to what's happening. I'm pretty much in the stream during the week, and what it seems as though is that, again, the media does. We have different interests, I guess we could say. That the media is very interested. There are certain media outlets that are very interested in kind of some of the mundane things that he does, or rather some of the kind of outlandish things that he does, but really don't have any say and don't want to report on some of the good things that are actually happening. But then I just think about it I'm reminded of what happened during Bill Clinton's presidency at the beginning. There was just a communications problem where they were just trying to get everything out there. And when there was this sense of wanting to get everything out there, they got nothing out there. And there wasn't a coherent vision moving forward. And they brought in the George Stephanopoulos. They brought in David Gergen to be able to try to shape that communication strategy. Does the White House now need someone to be a strong arm to shape that communications?
Well, I thought they were getting there after, us getting the new. Yes. Yeah, so I thought that they were getting there, and there was a little bit. I've heard there's more cohesion.
Yeah, cohesion.
Internally, since they've got some new members of their team. But I honestly am very doubtful that any amount of communications or talking points or like strategy is going to ever get the media to back off that 93% of negativity.
Yeah. And, it's fascinating because, again, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right?
That's right.
And so you have the sense that you can develop a great communication strategy. But one of the interesting things that we have in the 2017 era of being president is this thing called Twitter. I don't know if you're familiar with Twitter or not, but when the president's voice goes out over Twitter, it probably trumps, pun intended, it probably trumps anything else that White House is trying to put forward, because the media, we've always covered whatever the president says very closely. And every morning, usually around 5 o'clock in the morning here on Central Standard Time to around 8 o'clock, we're seeing these sporadic tweets, these words of the president that are going out that are talking about everything from what's happening on Fox News to the NFL, I guess on Monday morning, NFL players kneeling.
Yeah, they could take the Twitter account away from him between maybe the hours of like 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. That might help. No, but in all seriousness, the media has a vested interest in money, and they have a vested interest in getting viewers to watch, raising the money. And what they find that does that is, I think, just hyperbolic news and news that puts people on the defense and makes this world seem horrible. I read a statistic that said women or individuals in America think that the world has all-time highest crime rate it's ever had. Murder rates are up, war is up, and the truth is all of those things are statistically down for the last few decades. I mean, I think the homicide rate is the lowest it's been in 17 years. So with the news having to sensationalize everything to keep viewers interested, there's a very real detrimental impact that has on Americans. It's a different type of journalism. Even some individuals I've met who are, media coaches will talk about now with so many multimedia types of media at their disposal. You will do an interview. You'll have to tweet about the interview, do a Facebook article, a brief article and a video article all within less than an hour. And so there's no time to do some real journalistic, investigatory type of research on your issues. You've got to turn that around and get 20 of those in a day. Journalists don't have time to be detail-oriented.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what Judy Woodruff said, and I think it's a really great point. She says that we no longer live in a news cycle, but a news cyclone. And it's just so quick. So the average attention span for a goldfish is 9 seconds, but for a human is 8.2 seconds.
Really?
So we again are just we're not able to hold attention towards one particular issue for so long. And a part of it, there's a variety of things. You can say that it's the cell phone that's a part of it, that just this instantaneous demand to be satisfied by information, but rather the information has to be entertaining now. I guess what Neil Postman would say in Amusing Ourselves to Death. There's been this merge between information news and kind of entertaining news that it caused us to be able to think through this. And I think there's so many instances of that as well. We're just, again, the communications point. We can't concentrate on one thing, nor do we continue to see that the White House is putting out one thing. It's just a multitude of things. And potentially, could there be room for improvement? We would love to hear from you. Do you think there could be room for improvement? So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And when we get back, we'll continue to talk about just some of the divisiveness that's happening, that's just continuing to be perpetuated in Washington, as well as Chelsey's going to give us an update on some of the things that First Liberty is doing relative to First Amendment rights. And we'll be back right after this.
Sometimes I joke that I'll win the lottery when God blows the winning ticket across a parking lot to me. I don't buy tickets, so if he wants me to win, that's the way. Pretty silly, right? But a lot of us take a similar stance when it comes to the ills of our culture. We don't do anything. We simply hope things will change. I encourage you to get in the game and make things change. Join Truth Team 360 and be part of a work that changes lives and communities. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
From Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me. Ron and Debbie Hall have everything they could ever want, except for a loving marriage. But when Debbie befriends a homeless man, their lives begin to intersect, and they are all changed forever.
Amazing how far a little tender loving care can go.
Same Kind of Different as Me, based on the true story, now playing, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. More information is available at samekindofdifferentasmemovie.com.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the roundtable today by Chelsey Youman of First Liberty Institute. And if you don't know about what's happening at First Liberty, I would highly encourage you to know. So, Chelsey, tell us some of the stuff that First Liberty, this champion of religious liberty here in the U.S., is working on right now.
Champion of religious liberty. That's some high praise for Nick. Well, we are working around the clock, really, for your religious liberty rights. But we had a massive decision rendered last week, unfortunately, We did not win. We lost Bladensburg. If any of you have heard of the Bladensburg World War I Memorial, we were at the Fourth Circuit, which is the appellate level court out of Maryland, defending a cross memorial to our World War I veterans out of that town. So I think they lost around in the 40s, about 40 veterans the town lost. So over 90 years ago, the town established a cross-shaped memorial, much like you would see at Arlington National Cemetery. And it was challenged by the American Humanist Society. First Liberty Institute stepped in with our volunteer firm, Jones Day, and we represented the American Legion and all of the veterans there who wanted to defend this relic and this memorial to our veterans. We won at the district court and then lost now at the Fourth Circuit. So we will hopefully be headed to the Supreme Court over Bladensburg, because this is definitely a hard-fought battle for years and years now that we don't want to lose. We want these crosses to stand. Opposing counsel even suggested in oral argument that they, and I quote, chop off the arms of the cross so that it would essentially just be a pillar remaining. And
wow.
Just so offensive, not only to the veterans that it represents and stands for, but American history as a whole. The difference between these memorials and the other types of memorials that are being challenged are these memorials are just a symbol of the important place that historically faith has played in our society. And it's a symbol of comfort to those who have lost loved ones in war and other veterans. And if you could imagine Arlington Cemetery without any religious symbols, Stars of David or crosses, it would really, really be eradicating the important place historically that religion plays in the public sphere.
And I think that's one of the things that I so appreciate about what First Liberty's doing. It really is a sense that it's really wanting to champion this whole idea that we have religious liberty here in the U.S. And it's not privileged relative to the kind of Christian cases, or it's not privileged trying to give Christians a privileged seat at the table, but it really is just the founders understood religion to be a positive good for limited government. Religion exercised and worked out into churches and synagogues and mosques typically produce virtuous people. Virtuous people is a good thing. And what First Liberty does is it allows individuals to exercise those rights that are inalienable to them, that were given by a creator, and wanting to put that forward. And I just so appreciate what First Liberty's doing with that.
Well, we are really passionate about what we do. We represent anyone of any faith who has either undergone government punishment or, in this case, Establishment Clause issues because of their religious views. And just to unpack this for the listeners, the First Amendment really has two religious liberty kind of provisions in that clause. It's free exercise of religion. So the idea that Congress can make no law that abridges your right to exercise your religion. And then the second concept, which is where Bladensburg would fall under, would be, the Establishment Clause of religion, which often has been kind of misinterpreted and termed separation of church and state is something we're all familiar with. Well, that's not actually in the Constitution. So if you don't misquote the Constitution, but courts have held that government officials can be neutral towards religion, accommodate religion, and even acknowledge it in the public sphere, which is why before the legislature, you have chaplains that pray and bow their heads, because religion is huge to our society. It's a huge part of the human nature and the human spirit, is their right to choose their own beliefs, and it's okay for governments to acknowledge that. So we were surprised the Fourth Circuit ruled against that, but we think there's strong terms for appeal to the Supreme Court on that issue.
Yeah, and you know what's the funny thing, Chelsey? I was talking to a friend the other day about separation of church and state, and again insisting that it's nowhere to be found in our founding documents, but it dates all the way back to 1634 with the letter to Cotton Mather, and that's where we originally saw it. That was put forward with Roger Williams, who was the founder of Rhode Island, and it was this. He uses this beautiful imagery, and this is going to be the history nerd inside of me kind of flexing out. So I apologize if I put you to sleep. So for his understanding was he used this evocative illustration of the idea that the church was this beautiful garden and the state was this wilderness. And what we wanted to do was create a separation between the church and the state to the extent that you don't allow the wilderness into the garden. Right. It's the sense that we understand the beauty that comes from religion, but it was never to keep religion out of the state. Rather, it was meant to keep the state out of religion. And today we have the reciprocal view. We typically tend to think that religion needs to be kept in this small little circle and sphere on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, but that's nowhere to be found within the interpretation or within anywhere within the founding documents.
Right. And if anyone has, been paying attention to some of the verbiage, probably not as much as I do as, as someone who practices religious liberty law, but if you've listened to the verbiage, I think beginning back, before 2008, Hillary Clinton started the term freedom of worship. Obama picked it up and they carried that on through the administration. And a lot of people don't know that this is important, because the shift from what the First Amendment protects, which is the free exercise of religion, is a far cry from freedom of worship, which they've tried to narrow. The liberals have tried to narrow. Frankly, it's kind of a political issue. Narrow the free exercise of religion, which our founding fathers really believed to be a very broad, all-encompassing right, a right to believe everywhere you go in your own truth, and then to speak that truth is broad. It's not just meant to be in your church, but the freedom of worship, the connotation that has been narrowed, has said, okay, you don't take that belief with you to work or school. It's meant to just stay in your pews and your homes and in the confines of your church. And we know that the rights are broader than that.
And you look around the American landscape and you recognize that it was never meant to be there, and it's always brought about the good of our community. You look, I look at the downtown landscape of Dallas right now, and you can see Baylor Scott and White Hospital. A religious institute, religious people founded that hospital in order that it might be able to fulfill Matthew 25 of wanting to heal the sick, of wanting to attend to the least of these. You look downtown and you think about some of these institutions that have really dotted the American landscape, but have worked for the benefit of the American landscape because it was a religious belief that compelled this love for them, not just a love in word, but also love in deed. So you think about some of the founding institutions within education, to be able to train up ministers because they believed it to be true that reading was a positive good. That now we're better because of religious people founding these higher ed institutions.
That's right. I mean, even looking at a way to quantify it, after all of these hurricanes, Hurricane Irma and Harvey struck, they said that about 80% of aid offered was by faith-based nonprofits. 80%. So if you're thinking through even just nonprofits internationally, the amount of aid and help and service that goes into billions and billions of dollars worth of help that goes into communities around us because of people's faith, that it's a good thing. It's meant to be protected. It's meant to be strengthened. It's why faith-based initiatives have happened at the federal level, where they say we're going to partner and give grants, hopefully, to faith-based organizations because they're the ones willing to do the work.
I love that. And so it's the extent that these individuals that have been compelled by their faith and been compelled by their religion, from my standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, it's taken the idea from 2 Corinthians 5:14 of being compelled by his love to be able to jump that Roger Williams separation, that wall, to jump that Jeffersonian wall in 1802, the letter to the Danbury Baptist, in order to go out into that world, recognizing it to be true of what Jesus said, that you will have trouble in this world, from John 16:33. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted, from 2 Timothy 3:12, of going out into this world, recognizing the warnings that have been given to us, but the glory that awaits us because of this. And I'm always reminded of what it says in Romans 8:18, that I've considered these present troubles nothing compared to the eternal glory that is to be revealed, of the beauty that's come when we give rather than receive. And we've been given so much in Jesus, and we've been given so much out of our religious principles, that we can now give as well, right? We don't just have to receive what the government can give to us, but to champion what John F. Kennedy said, don't ask what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country.
You're so right about that. And to think that, I think, religious liberty has gotten a bad rap in the last few years, but what we're talking about today is really what it's all about. It's about allowing people the breathing space in the room to choose their beliefs, to speak about those beliefs, and to act in accordance with those beliefs, which if you're a Christian means serving your community and giving to others. And, it's not being just about you. And I think people lose sight of that, and it becomes a bad thing. Or, especially if the American Humanist Society, in the case of Bladensburg, they have no concept or understanding. It's a complete misunderstanding of the Christian faith to say that we have to eradicate it from society. It means they truly fundamentally don't understand that Christian faith is about serving God first and serving others next.
Yeah. And again, I think the thing where a lot of people get hung up is they continue to point to these outlier institutions, or outlier instances, rather, these examples that are outlandish, that don't represent fully the body of work that's been put in. And we'll be the first to admit, because we recognize, especially during the Reformation, right? We're celebrating the 500th year of the Reformation. And the first thesis that Martin Luther had was the whole of Christian life is one of repentance. And so to recognize there have been instances within Christendom that we are not proud of. There have been the Crusades that we are not proud of. There have been other instances that we are not proud of. But you can't judge the whole body of work by that one outlier instance. Right.
And it's that humans make up ultimately the institutions of churches, but that, religion is more pervasive than that.
So true. So true. And so we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to call in at 800-351-1212, we'd love to take your call, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Father Joseph LaFleur served the Army Air Corps as chaplain during World War II. In 1941, LaFleur dashed about Clark Field in the Philippines amidst bombs and flying shrapnel, pulling wounded soldiers to safety. For such bravery, the Army Air Corps awarded Chaplain LaFleur the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Distinguished Service Cross. Later, while imprisoned by the Japanese for 3 years, he never stopped his ministry of care. He worked to meet the physical needs of his fellow prisoners, often bartering with guards for food. Once he confronted a fellow prisoner about stealing rations from other prisoners, even landing 2 holy punches to pacify the unruly and unrepentant soldier. In 1944, a U.S. submarine torpedoed LaFleur's prisoner transport ship. Rather than abandon ship or seek to escape Japanese gunfire and grenades lobbed in his direction, the chaplain worked to calm his men and to help them find an escape passage. Chaplain LaFleur died as he lived, in faithful service to his fellow man. Motivated by faith to care for their fellow man, chaplains in our nation's service routinely steady our servicemen and women before, during, and after battle. Military chaplains navigate the evils of war to bring good to our military. We honor Chaplain LaFleur and all chaplains for their dedication to the souls of our armed forces. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View for this last segment. 9 minutes and 8 seconds is what the clock is telling me. And I am Nick Pitts, and I'm joined at the round table by Chelsey Youman of First Liberty Institute. It's been a packed show, Chelsey. We've talked about everything from going all the way back to the first hour. We were talking with Bryan Newman, of the president of Young Leaders for Life. That's a branch that's Council for Life, and he was sharing with us the pro-life movement that's happening in Dallas right now and some of the good work that they're doing, but specifically some of the work that that will be kind of come to fruition, rather, after all the behind-the-scenes work to put on this luncheon that'll happen on Wednesday. And you can sign up for that luncheon. There's still room available at councilforlife.org. And it's going to be a great program. I went 2 years ago and was just blown away by the presentation by Kirsten Powers of Fox News at the time, but now is at CNN, of how she put forward this pro-life logical argument, but does it in such a compelling and winsome way. And they always bring in a great entertainment. It's always a great room, and just always leaves me so refreshed and encouraged by what the pro-life movement's doing, not just simply to eradicate abortion, but to create an atmosphere whereby life might be able to flourish from womb to tomb. And then we transition from that, and we just talked about some of the atrocities of some of the stuff that's happening in Hollywood and in the banking, everything relative to this kind of sexual abuse and these sexual allegations, and just how wrong it is, but how much there's a great need for churches and other intermediary institutions to be able to inculcate some values like virtue and treating others well and some of those variety of issues. And then we kind of transitioned to Chelsey gave us an update on some of the things with First Liberty. And Chelsey, I want to tease this out for a little bit, because I know when individuals hear this religious liberty, they sometimes think that it's almost like a license to be able to discriminate. Help me to understand that's not the case at all when it comes to religious liberty, right?
Sure. Well, we can all agree on a few basic points. First being that the government should never punish you because of your religious beliefs, that it is not the government's role to be, big brother and to come in with a big stick and wield it against individuals who they disagree with based on their religious beliefs. And we can all agree that people should be allowed to live in accordance with their beliefs, and that's really what the First Amendment protects. So those are like the broader principles that I think underlie everything. And if you really truly believe in that, if you believe that people have this inherent human dignity and these natural rights that the government doesn't give them, that's kind of the whole principle behind natural rights, is that the government doesn't give you your rights. Actually, natural rights come with the territory that the government's actually limited by them.
Yeah.
That's really the viewpoint that we start with. And from there you say, okay, well, then it doesn't matter what the truth is necessarily, so long as it's not obviously violent or harmful, and there's not an actual injury that occurs to others, then those rights are protected. So I always say, if you tell me that your religious belief is the sky is purple, I don't agree with that, but I'm going to defend your right to believe that and to preach about that and to go into the streets and say it, because we have a rich heritage and history of acknowledging the important role that religion plays in the public sphere.
And I think one of the individuals that I really look up to that I think painted a beautiful picture is one of the images that he says is that the American experiment was radically different than any other government that had been formed in the history of humankind. And the illustration that he used is the sense that up until the American experiment, it was always thought that you yourself were an island, your company, your people were an island, and the government, it was the ocean that was around you. And now with the American experiment, it's quite the opposite now, that the government is this island, and you yourself, because you have these natural rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it really is, the government just simply, the Constitution, our founding documents, iterated what we can do and others that aren't even listed, and it gives us this freedom that has never been seen before in human history. Am I right with that?
You're absolutely right that, even Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what's God's. There's supposed to be a distinction there to say that, with all due respect to government, I'm allowed to operate in my own sphere here without you. And the minute that I think that we talk about this a lot, that Democrats often think, or atheists, I should say, without a God, then who is their God? What are they serving? And who becomes the moral compass for our country? Well, it's going to be politics. It's going to be politicians. We read an article that's posted on the website today that talked about people looking to their leader, and this was talking about Trump, to instill virtue and to be a source of hope and to heal the country's wounds. And I just read that and thought, that's the role of Jesus Christ. That's not the role of my president. My president is supposed to make sure we're safe and other countries don't invade us. He's the commander in chief. But, I don't put my hope or instill my hope into politics. All that to say, what I would always get back to is I think people forget that religious persons are a protected class.
Yeah.
So it's race, religion, and national origin. Those are the original protected classes. And actually, religion was the first protected class out of the First Amendment.
Wow.
So people forget that they actually, race, religion, and national origin get a special treatment in the courts. It's called strict scrutiny. The government can only infringe on your rights based on those characteristics and traits in the most narrowest of circumstances. It's the exception. And then we have over 225 years of rich jurisprudence, what we call conscience protections. So just like we would protect the right of a doctor not to perform an abortion or a nurse not to perform an abortion, we have conscience protections for people not to serve based on their religious views on war and killing. And so we have just a very, very strong history. You can go to firstliberty.org to read more about these types of issues that say, religion is a protected class. It's worthy of protection. And I think that we're gradually, society is actually getting a little bit away from that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love what First Liberty is doing to be able to help organizations and individuals better understand the rights they have, not necessarily because they were granted by government, because you were born with it. As Lady Gaga, right? Lady Gaga was in that picture of the 5 presidents. I guess that's why it's so fresh on my mind. And so I'm grateful for First Liberty from that. And then there's also the selfish standpoint for me. I'm grateful for First Liberty because it allows me to be able to do what I do. At Dallas Baptist University, I serve as the executive director of the Institute for Global Engagement to try to help organizations and entities better understand how to respond to geopolitical and cultural events and to be able to provide resources as well as opportunities to better understand that. And then also this other little thing I do, it's called the daily briefing. And so the daily briefing is an email I send out every morning. And what I try to do in the daily briefing is identify and highlight articles that I believe are in articles that people will be talking about during the day, or articles that reveal the spirit of the day. So maybe articles that people will be talking about today. So people, I think, are going to be talking about the 5 presidents at Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
And so how are we to think about that? Well, we also know what God would think about that. It's beautiful when brothers dwell in unity, right? From Psalm 133:1. And so to help individuals understand this sense that that the Bible is a lamp unto our feet and a guide for our path. And so how do we think about the news of the day from a biblical perspective? And so that's the daily briefing. I also saw in the daily briefing this morning, I wrote that there's a certain time that you can apply for a job.
I read that.
But here's what was most shocking to me, that individuals aren't necessarily jumping to new jobs, but 65% of Americans would rather their boss be fired than get a salary increase. Is that not striking to you?
That's hilarious.
I thought that was strange, that 65% of Americans would rather their boss be fired.
The animosity is real. That's some real animosity. Like, I will pay to have a new boss.
Exactly. And it talks about, again, it goes back to this study on labor force, rather. And it was interesting because they said that 70% of Americans are not engaged, are not inspired by the work that they do. Only 30% really enjoy are kind of fully engaged in the work that they do, which is just really, it's just unfortunate. I think to a certain degree it's unfortunate, and then to another degree, especially for someone young like me, I might not be having my dream job right now, but I want to be moving towards that end because I realize I still have to work a little bit. But nevertheless, you can sign up for the daily briefing at www.thebriefing.net. Again, that URL is www.thebriefing.net. Your news, 5 minutes, to give you a biblical perspective on it. You can get that every morning at 6 o'clock straight to your inbox. And that is today's show for this National iPod Day. And it has been a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Nick Pitts, and I'm so grateful that Chelsey decided to join us today from First Liberty Institute. And I hope you'll continue to tune in. We've got Point of View will be coming on later on at 1 o'clock time, and you can check them out on Facebook as well as on the website. And I'll see you next Monday.
From director Kevin Sorbo and executive producer Sean Hannity comes Let There Be Light. Saul Harkins is a man who has turned away from God, but a near-fatal car crash gives him one last chance to renew his life, his family, and his faith. Let There Be Light, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters October 27. More information is available at LetThereBeLightMovie.com.
Christianity is based in history, on evidence, and all truth revealed in God's Word is for our good, not just spiritually, but in every way. Point of View's mission is to restore God's truth in our culture, and to do it effectively, we need you as a partner. Your gift helps inspire people, young and old, from coast to coast to rebuild truth in their communities. Join the Truth Team today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Get off the sidelines. pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.